To assist us in our task today, I'm calling upon the services of the little book I'm holding in my hand with a title that needs to be explained. Yonder Beautiful and Stately College Edifice, A History of Pennsylvania Hall, Old Dorm. Who said that? And what were the circumstances? Those words were stated by the chief founder of the college, Samuel Simon Schmucker, when he was delivering the address at the laying of the cornerstone of Stevens Hall. In talking about Stevens Hall, he said, "Let's look at yonder beautiful and stately college edifice. We owe it to the exertions of Thaddeus Stevens, because as a member of the Pennsylvania legislature, it was he who in 1834 argued in the legislature for an appropriation to build a building on this young college's campus. In the course of his remarks, he said, "It has been chartered 2 years and organized about 18 months. It now has 98 students without a house to put them in, or a library, or apparatus." The legislature appropriated $18,000, and the effort to provide a house to put them in began. It didn't begin by calling first on a contractor or a carpenter. It began first by calling upon an architect who lived in Philadelphia, who was a young man, who had studied under one of the chief architects of his day, who in turn was a student of Benjamin Latrobe, who was partly responsible for the design of the U.S. Capitol. John C. Troutwine, this architect, said, "I'm presenting you with a plan for a simple building which is Greek architecture in design and which is in keeping with the American Republic." In the course of one of his letters, he said, "It cannot fail to please you if carefully and accurately executed." And indeed, it was carefully and accurately executed. And this building was occupied by students before it was completely finished in the fall of 1837. The founders of Gettysburg College, along with the founders of every similar institution in this country, had ideas as to how a college was to run. In 1834, the faculty said that as nearly as possible, the faculty was to run after the manner of a well-regulated family. Not in loco parentis, but parentis. You could not leave this building to go into town except during a few hours each day. You were not able to choose a lot of electives. You either took the curriculum or you went home. Every evening, someone representing the faculty might drop in to see that nothing untoward was going on in your room. Now, I think if the college was regulated when I arrived here as a student, I might have gone home, because those rules and regulations, while most of them I would want to obey, were not supposed to be musts, but things that I might select. And interestingly enough, after about 2 generations, the faculty told the board, we're not quite like a well-regulated family. Now let's jump ahead to 1863 and simply note that on the morning of July the 1st, the Confederates were approaching from the north. During the course of the day, they occupied the town, and for about a month, there were as many as 700 soldiers in this building. Coming back a few days later, one of the students said, on our arrival, we found in and around the building 700 wounded rebels. When I came to my room, I saw that it afforded ample accommodation for 3. Normally it was for 1. There were 1 on the bed and 2 on the floor. The moans, the prayers, the shrieks of the wounded and dying were heard everywhere. Only a heart dispossessed of all feeling of humanity could refuse sympathy and help in such a time as that. Let's jump ahead a long time to 1937. This portico was added then. Until 1937, there was 1 portico, and it was on the other side. This one on the 100th anniversary of the occupancy of the building. And in his address, the orator of the day said that the building had ceased to be any longer a mere building. It had become a symbol, a visible embodiment of the whole life and spirit of the college. Now, those words were spoken by a retired faculty member. He did not know that 4 years later, I was to enroll in the college, and if I were turned around the other way, I could show you the precise building, the room in this building in which I lived for a year. It was a hot room right over a boiler, and if I returned to the campus on Sunday evening and opened that door, the temperature was near 100 degrees. Now, I also remember being told that an act of Congress had provided that the United States flag should fly over this building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. An act of Congress, because it was a hospital. Now, as a freshman and as a sophomore, I was inclined to believe that because I didn't have to prove it. Years later, when I was dean of the college, and when someone outside the institution asked on what authority the flag is flown, I looked through all of the acts of Congress. I looked through all of the executive proclamations of the president, and I couldn't find that backing. One day I turned to Joe Carver, who had been the janitor on the campus for probably 30 or 40 years. And I said, Joe, what do you know about the flag flying 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He said, I remember one day telling the president of the college, I have to go into the cupola every morning and put the flag out, and then I have to go up in the evening and take it down. Now, Joe was responsible as custodian for most of the campus, and it was a real burden for him to have to do that every day. Joe said, when I told the president about this, he said, why don't you put the flag up and keep it up? And whenever it's worn out, I'll buy you a new one. Now, this was the act of Congress that I had been told about. Now let's jump ahead again about a generation. By the 1950s and the 1960s, this building needed a lot of care. It was old. Mothers from the New York City area who brought their sons here were unhappy at the prospect that next fall they were going to have to room in a building like this. The dean of men told me that one mother whose son had been admitted visited the building and then went to the dean and said, he's not going to room in a room like that. He's going somewhere else. Now, what to do with a building like this? There is a building on the seminary campus which was built and occupied in 1831 and 1832, just about the same time as this building. And after World War II, the seminary board eventually decided to authorize removal of that building. There was a hue and cry in the community, and some local people persuaded the seminary to deed it to the Adams County Historical Society. That building has been saved, and it's the home of the Adams County Historical Society today. There were some people who told the president of this college, tear the building down, get rid of it. I remember one prominent alumnus who said, tear it down and plant grass. Now, there's nobody to establish what I'm about to tell you. There's nobody living other than me. I said to President Arnold Hanson, before you tear down this building, call upon a restoration architect to say what he thinks should be done with it. President Hanson did that, and G. Edwin Brumbaugh, a restoration architect, came, and this is what he said about this building. Gettysburg College is fortunate if it preserves its original building. Perhaps even more fortunate that this symbol of the early days is a worthy piece of architecture. The first college buildings in this country are not always worth preserving, but many schools like Princeton and Yale and Harvard and Dartmouth do have in their oldest buildings well-designed representatives of early American architecture. And indeed, the architectural style, American Greek Revival, which you see here, may properly be described as our earliest national architecture. And so, in 1968 and 1969, the old building was carefully looked at. Much of it was removed. It was discovered for the first time that the cupola had never been securely fastened to the roof. It is now. On October 24th, 1970, this building was dedicated for the first time. It had never been dedicated before. There was a dedicatory address, and the speaker, in coming to a close, said this: "And now, having saved the building, let us use it, and let us get on with the serious work in which this and every other college must be engaged." And for about 40 years, we have gotten on with that work. Yonder beautiful and stately college edifice still stands and is still used.